Please remember to like and subscribe for more fanfics. Enjoy.
Coil by Allegory for Hatred. This is Book 2 of Magic and Mystery. All rights go to Allegory for Hatred. I do not own this story. 11 Cats cradle Dazai leaned against the wall beside the library entrance, arms crossed over his chest and glaring at anyone who passed by. It wasn't unprovoked. For the last 10 minutes, anyone who saw him would either stare daggers into him or squeak and hurry away. Dazai was just glad no one had yet to start another fight with him. He sighed, giving a group of chittering fourth years a heavy stare. Dazai recognized a couple of them from Pansy's group the other day. They jumped. Going silent, they hastily scampered away. Good. I apologize for my tardiness, Dazai. I only got a little distracted and wandered off. Dazai blinked out of his glare. He turned, softening his expression when his eyes met the ditzy smile of Luna Lovegood. Did you know there's a secret passageway behind the painting of Elizabeth Burke? The one down in the dungeons. Only when I asked to be let through, she said I'd have to get a Slytherin's permission first, Luna rambled. She said she'd only let a pure blood through. I am one, you know. Although it's an awful practice to keep, picking and choosing like that. Either way, she said she'd only allow a Slytherin pure blood to pass through. I suppose that means you can't enter. Everyone says you're a Muggle-born, and... Luna. Dazai raised a hand, halting her tirade before it could wander too far. It's fine that you were late. Don't worry about it. Luna blinked slowly. Then she offered a small, pleased-looking smile. Of course, with that out of the way, Dazai was finally able to ask, You said you had a copy of the Quibbler for me? She bounced. The flighty movement immediately drew Dazai's attentions to the heavy-looking bag wrapped over her shoulder. It tugged and swayed when she did. The bag was rough and clearly well used. When Luna reached into it to grab something, Dazai realized why. It was stuffed to the brim and then some with papers. Stacks and stacks of tabloid articles filled the tote. Dazai watched Luna struggle to pull out the right paper for nearly a minute before finally giving in. Let's sit down, he said, voice tight. He pointed to the library over his shoulder. Luna tilted her head. The faraway look in her eyes told nothing of what she was thinking. Are you self-conscious? She asked. Dazai stared at her, bemused. You look like you're going to fall over, digging around in that thing, he said instead of replying outright. Again, she merely blinked, looking to not quite understand Dazai's concern. Although Dazai supposed Luna did have a point. He would rather do without all the prying eyes on them. Also, he'd prefer to read with a little privacy. Whatever paper, or papers as it looked now, Luna had brought for him, Dazai wanted to take his time sorting through the information. Standing in the open hallway might cause some kind of commotion. Luna still hadn't said anything except to stare blankly Dazai's way. Sure. Yes. I'm self-conscious, he lied just to get her to stop staring like that. He rocked back on his heels. Let's sit down. I thought so, Luna smiled, a vague emotion in her eyes. You're always looking around like you expect trouble. Or like maybe you worry what everyone is thinking of you. Don't worry, Dazai. My dad edits the Quibbler, and he's really a nice man. He wouldn't say anything bad about you if you didn't deserve it, she said lightly as they entered the library. Dazai guided her towards his favorite seat with little more than a glance her way. Why, in an article just 2 months ago, Dad wrote a rather scathing article about a potion brewer in Nocturne Alley, purposefully selling dangerous potions like that. Oh. Is this where you want to sit? Dazai had already taken a seat before Luna startled out of her one-person conversation. He really didn't mind her rambling, mostly. The more she talked, the more information she spilled. Of course, Luna didn't seem to have anything important to say, but the part of Dazai's mind that was always waiting for people to accidentally spill their secrets was easily willing to sponge up her meandering thoughts. As long as it was prudent, that was. Dazai leaned into the wall. This way, he could keep his eyes on the rest of the library without having to worry about watching his back. Promptly, Luna took the seat across from Dazai. She pulled her overlarge bag into her lap with a thunk and started sorting through it with hasty fingers. This time, when Luna dug through her bag, she did so without nearly falling over. She made quick work withdrawing a tall stack of papers. It smacked down onto the table between them. The stack looked heavy enough. Dazai imagined if set them on his chest he would suffocate to death, though that didn't seem like a very painless death. Dazai sighed forlornly. These are all about me? He asked instead. It wasn't really a surprise, considering how much the Daily Prophet had to say about him. Still, the Quibbler wasn't exactly as well respected as its senior publisher, so he doubted running a story like his garnered it much in the way of sales. Luna shook her head, silver hair flapping into her face. No, I've brought you everything. Dazai paused. He looked the pile of papers up and down once again, reassessing. Everything? Everything my dad has ever published. Well, as much as I could carry today. Luna brushed a lock of stray hair behind her ear, but it twitched awry a second later. The ones about you are on top. Of course you're more concerned with those. But as a new reader of the Quibbler, you should really be reading all the previous articles as well. They were never widely published. I imagine you're one of only a few people with such a wonderful opportunity. Dazai blinked several times as Luna pulled paper after paper out of her bag. What was he supposed to say at a time like this? This was beginning to look like a more daunting task than he originally expected. Originally, he just wanted to check what other media outlets were saying about him. But this was turning into a multi-hour reading experience. Holding back a tired sigh, Dazai grabbed the topmost tabloid. A second later, Luna had replaced it with another 10. The hero in our midst, conflict between exorcist and spirit in Hogwarts. Dazai sniffed, skimming the article for only a second before gingerly setting it down. Ah, a shame that so few people will get to read my dad's works. I've read them all a dozen times at least, you know, and I've taken the liberty of signing you up to receive the weekly newsletter. You'll need to start paying on your own, of course. Dad would only let me get you 1 week free. I called it a friend's discount. I've never been able to do that before. Even Ginny won't read the Quibbler, since she says it's a bunch of hokum. Luna was still rambling. Dazai zoned her out, only keeping one ear out for anything of worth. It's the only thing we disagree on, really. Well, aside from all the fact that she's always wandering away and turning up hours later. I asked her to stop doing that, but she just says she doesn't know what I'm talking about. I heard that you also get lost a lot, Dazai. Where do you suppose... Well, Dazai was really starting to understand why the Quibbler's story had been picked up only by one person, while the Daily Prophet's story had been picked up by absolutely everyone else. He glanced down at the paper about him, then the next one in the stack. 22 ways to tell if your crush is actually a bone-eating bird in disguise. Hokum, Ginny had evidently called it. Dazai was starting to understand why. The Quibbler didn't have a good reputation for a reason, Dazai was quickly realizing. Somehow it had sunk below the level of slander, as in the Daily Prophet, then even further below that into the realm of just saying, well, anything. Utter nonsense, Dazai thought with a scrunched nose. There didn't appear to be rhyme nor reason to its contents. It jumped wildly from half-true political investigations to nonsense about made-up creatures the next. The article about himself, for example, spouted out some true information about last year's incident, then coupled it with inane ramblings about spirits and exorcists. At the very least, Dazai got the sense Luna's father wasn't as maliciously motivated as the Daily Prophet was. Still, thank you, Luna. This is... He paused. The lie fought in his throat. This is really helpful. Absolutely not. Luna's returning smile was blinding. I'm glad you think so. At the very least, Dazai had achieved what he'd set out to. He now knew another player in the magical community's game of information. And although this one wasn't particularly reputable, perhaps Mori would find a use for it later. Maybe. Well, probably not. But no one could say Dazai hadn't done his due diligence. Speaking of Mori, Dazai thought, he needed to draft a letter to the doctor soon. It was almost time for another progress report. Not that Dazai had anything to show for it. I'm sorry. I suppose this must seem like a lot of reading to do all at once, Luna apologized. Though Dazai got the sense she wasn't as sorry as her words might suggest, she still had that eager, if distant, gleam in her eyes. Perhaps merely reading the latest ones will suffice. Although, you'll find yourself missing a lot of important information about were-creatures. You never know what might come in handy down the line. The question must have been on his face, because Luna wisely added, werewolves, wertigers, werefoxes. Dad says anything can be a were-creature. I asked if someone could be a were-human, and Dad said I should look forward to an article he's writing for next month. You don't think that's possible, do you? A were-human, I mean. Of course werewolves and the like exist. Dazai opened his mouth to respond. To say what he wasn't yet sure, But something brushed past the back of his head. Dazai shot forward. That feeling just now. What's wrong? Luna asked. You look as though you've just realized something grave. Perhaps an assignment you forgot to do? Dazai ignored her. Noisy. A buzz of magic just behind his head, just inches away. His eyes snapped to face it. It felt large, oppressive. But all that faced Dazai in that direction was a wall. No magic caster, no magical creature, no anything. Just a blank wall. Luna was still talking, but the words no longer registered in his ears. Magic in the walls? Dazai's brows furrowed as tried to make sense of it. This was what he'd felt the other day, wasn't it? Only this time it had felt so close as to touch him. A shiver racked Dazai's spine as unease rolled through him once again. What was it? What could get this close to him, without him even knowing it? Like any other form of magic, it was buzzing with potential danger, a threat, an unknown. What magic was sneaking about in the walls of Hogwarts? And why now, when he hadn't felt anything like it all last year? His eyes found a spot on the wall where the sensation seemed to be the strongest. The magic had coiled there, and sent a shivering cold up Dazai's spine. Just as he started to focus on it, it moved. The massive magical energy slithered through the walls of the library. Within just a few seconds it had grown so far and faint. Massive and fast, Dazai shuddered. Without thinking, he bolted to his feet. He had to know what this thing was, and there was only one way to do that. Dazai? What? Paying Luna no heed, he sped away from the table, following the trail of magical energy as it slipped and slithered behind paintings and stone. He hardly noticed that he was running to keep up with it until a prefect he didn't recognize snapped, "No running." Dazai ignored them. The magical creature, for it must have been one, Dazai had never felt a spell move in such a manner before, took a harsh turn left. A few seconds later, Dazai did the same. A mix of curiosity and trepidation sped his steps. But mostly, it was the unease. Dazai didn't like being left in the dark, and this creature that had moments before been close enough as to strike him dead, if it so wished. It was a complete unknown to him, and no one else here even seemed to notice its presence. Evidence enough was the startled, wide-eyed stares he was getting from the other students. People jerked away from his sprint. Murmured slights and shouts alike followed him through one hall and the next. Sprinting blindly, Dazai nearly slammed into Lockhart. He narrowly avoided disaster by swerving around the professor at the last second. "The demon!" Lockhart shrilled frightfully. Then, ostensibly embarrassed by the shocked screech he'd let out, abruptly whirled around and locked himself in his empty classroom. Dazai paid him no mind. The magic snaked around a winding staircase. Dazai took it 3 steps at a time. A second later he burst into an empty hallway, sweating and out of breath. Then, just as soon as it appeared, the magic vanished into thin air. Dazai came to a dead stop. The corridor was dead silent, save for the sound of Dazai gasping breaths. Aha! Where? Looking back and forth, Dazai searched for where the magic had gone. Only trying to focus found the hall empty of any magic aside from the latent magic always buzzing in the air. Still catching his breath, Dazai let his eyes slip shut. Just like during his first remedial magics lesson, he felt his magical sensitivity heighten tenfold. The magic around him turned from a slight buzzing to the static song of 100 cicadas. Dazai squeezed his eyes, trying in vain to drown out the overwhelming sensation in favor of the more nuanced one he'd chased all the way here. Nothing. Rather than clear anything up, all that had done was give him a headache. Dazai sighed. He took one last cementing breath before opening his eyes once more. The hall was empty of students and magical creatures alike. Whatever the creature was that he'd followed, it was long gone now. Dazai clicked his tongue, muttering a curse under his breath. Just his luck to run all the way here, only to have the damned creature slip out of his grasp. He took a deep breath, ready to return to Luna at the library. He was already concocting a reasonable lie for his absence as he turned around. Squeak! Dazai blinked out of his thoughts, immediately going on the defensive. Was the creature here after all? Oh. Dazai's arms stalled over his chest protectively. He dropped them a second later when the source of the sound became obvious. Angel blinked 2 amethyst eyes up at him. "It's you," he said, not bothering to hide the distaste in his voice. Something about Ron's pet rat always made Dazai feel apprehensive. It was almost certainly those dull but intelligent eyes. Rats weren't meant to look like they were dissecting you with a glance. But it was clear within the second that Angel wasn't responsible for the magical signature Dazai had followed here. "Don't you have anything better to do than loiter around places like this?" Angel predictably said nothing in return. He did, however, lift his head to stare Dazai in the eyes. Dazai frowned down at the rat, wondering mutely if it was a bad friend move to kick Ron's pet. He was saved from having to consider this any further when, abruptly, Angel scurried a few feet away. Whereupon he turned back to look at Dazai once more. Dazai took a step forward. Angel wanted him to follow. Creepy, he shivered. Ron's stupid pet is the worst. Once Dazai was within touching distance of Angel, the rat scampered away again with impressive speed. Dazai continued to follow him. Angel came to a stop several feet away. He stared. Dazai stared back. Then, his steps halted immediately. Something wet and red pooled around his shoes. Dazai abruptly noticed the smell of iron hanging thick in the air. Blood. Slowly, Dazai raised his gaze from the floor, moving up brick by brick until he was staring at the wide-eyed, unmoving stare of a dead cat. Mrs. Norris. Professor Filch's hall monitor cat. The cat's body was completely still. She wasn't breathing. Her body seemed to be crudely wrapped around a light fixture. Bones cracked and bent around the iron. Dazai took a step backwards. A streak of blood marked his step on the floor below. Mrs. Norris didn't appear to have any wounds on her. The blood wasn't hers. Rather, written on the stone wall in bold and bloody letters, someone had painted, "The Chamber of Secrets has been opened. Enemies of the air, beware." Dazai stared at it. Chamber of Secrets meant nothing to him. It wasn't a familiar term in the slightest. The only thing familiar about this image was the draw of blood across brick. Dazai had seen enough blood in his lifetime to tell that whoever had written this message had done so with a careful, unshaking finger. They hadn't even used a brush, meaning someone was wandering around the school right now with blood sticking to their index finger. Dazai slipped the glove off one of his hands. He poked his own finger into the wall, and it drew away wet and red. Still fresh then. He'd only just barely missed the perpetrator. A mysterious air and a dangerous magical creature living in the walls. Was it too much of a coincidence to say this string of events had nothing to do with Lucius's ever-impending test? What? Oh my God! Dazai jerked around. More than a dozen horrified classmates stared back at him. It was mostly strangers, but a few familiar faces stood among them. Ginny Weasley's horrified stare met Dazai's across the hall, then snapped away just as fast. Pansy's narrow glare was amongst the crowd as well. He watched as the students looked from Dazai to Mrs. Norris, to the blood now staining Dazai's hand. The realization in their eyes quickly turned to dread. Dazai wondered, without a trace of amusement in his veins, if the same expression was reflected on his face as well. "He's a demon! Monster! The demon killed Mrs. Norris!" Minerva McGonagall heard the cries before she even made it out of the stairwell. The fear in those voices, it set her heart thundering, and her footfalls pounding against the stone. She was pushing ahead of the crowd before even considering otherwise, arms outstretched to shield the students from whatever danger lay ahead. The first thing her eyes landed on was the boy. She recognized his familiar mop of brown hair immediately. Mr. Dazai Osamu. Minerva disregarded him at once, already desperately searching for the threat. The threat! It was only then that everyone's words caught up to her. Demon. As in demon student, Minerva realized with a start. Dazai blinked at her with two searching eyes. He seemed undecided as to whether he should be watching her or the crowd behind her. Dazai's mouth opened, then stuttered closed a second later. Oh. If the situation was to be believed, then Dazai was the threat. "What exactly is going on here?" Minerva asked. She had to force the calm in her voice. Tens of voices rose up in chorus behind her, echoing and rumbling, and making not a lick of coherent sense to Minerva's ears. The cacophony didn't die down even after a long moment. Across the hall, Dazai had gone perfectly still, tense. Minerva looked him up and down for sign of danger. Dazai's empty hands were still, hovering just over his chest. No weapon, not even his wand. He only had one of those strange gloves on, the other held tightly in a closed fist. Something red was sticking to one of his unclothed fingers and his robes looked rumpled. Beside him was, "Stay back!" She instructed the students at her back with a sudden call. "Now!" The blank-eyed, breathless body of Mrs. Norris dangled beside Dazai. The red splashed across the wall and over Dazai's hand painted a clear picture in Minerva's mind of what had transpired here. Dazai followed her gaze, and something grim overcame his expression. The bewildered look he'd worn just seconds before was replaced with a blank mask. The reflection of blood beside him and the sinister feel to this whole scene made it seem as if Dazai's eyes were a dangerous shade of piercing red, rather than brown. Demon, Minerva thought despite herself. I'm looking at a demon. She shook her head, dislodging the impulsive thought but not the wariness. Mr. Dazai, she projected her voice across the hall. Dazai, still standing beside the unbreathing form of Mrs. Norris, merely leveled her with a flat look. Step away from the wall. Obligingly, Dazai did as she said. Then, after a second, his hands fell flat at his sides, and though those empty hands posed no threat to begin with, Minerva still found herself relaxing minutely. What happened here? She asked. The students muttered at her back. Minerva had half a mind to send them away, to shut them up, or to keep them safe, she wasn't sure. Before she could, however, Dazai finally answered. His voice silenced the students as if it were a spell itself. I don't know. Dazai's words were softly spoken. I only just arrived here as well. Minerva stared at him, eyes narrowed, as she tried to dissect the truth there. She couldn't find any lie, but also couldn't shake the nagging feeling snaking in the back of her head. This boy is dangerous. Something about the way he held himself, that unflappable blank look, everyone in this school was terrified of him. The Daily Prophet had nothing but bad stories to tell. Quirrell, for all the man was a rat, was dead. Now, standing before a bloody message and a dead cat, it couldn't just be a coincidence. The blood on Dazai's hand caught the light. Minerva steeled herself. Without glancing back, she declared, Students, leave. I will handle this. A wave of arguments rose up behind her. Expel him. I'm not going to class with someone like that. Look what he did. He's enough. A new voice cut in. It was oily, older. Minerva released a breath, relieved for the backup. Curiously, she saw Dazai doing the same. Are you all idiots? Severus barked, coming up on Minerva's left side. A professor told. You to leave, so leave. Unless you would all like a private detention with me, I suggest you obey your betters. A few students actually squeaked in fear. Under the harsh glare of Severus Snape, most of the students were quick to scamper off. Notably, however, quite a few lingered for another moment longer. It took another seething glare from the potion master to chase them off. Even as the students left, they did so with their heads craned around to watch as much as they could. Minerva frowned, seeing that. When had Dazai become the center of the school's attention? If the school was this afraid of Dazai, why hadn't Albus done anything about it yet? Moreover, why hadn't Albus told her to do something about it? Beside her, Severus's expression was severe. He took in the scene without saying a word. The only tell in his expression was the minute pinching of his brow, deepening the more he looked. His lips twitched downward upon reading the message written across the wall. Minerva's reaction had been a similarly sinking feeling. Finally, Severus's gaze came to rest on Dazai's figure. The boy stared back, unblinking. It was silent for a second. The severity of the situation seemed to weigh a ton. Minerva bristled to take action, but didn't yet know who to take action against. It seemed clear that Dazai was the perpetrator, but something still held her back. Regardless, with Severus here now, she was sure Dazai was about to receive the tongue-lashing of a lifetime. What did you do now, problem child? He sighed, exasperated. Minerva did a double-take. Severus pointedly ignored her open-mouthed stare. Dazai responded with a petulant, I didn't do anything. It's only that everyone here thinks I'm some sort of monster. Minerva nearly spit out in shock. Severus raised a brow. It looked as if he wanted to say something in response to that, but held himself back at the last second. Instead, he took a stern few steps forward, stopping just out of Dazai's reach. What happened? Dazai eyed the movement for only a second before gesturing to Mrs. Norris with a tilt of his head. Someone killed this cat and graffitied the wall. He paused, briefly meeting Minerva's eyes before choosing instead to focus entirely on Severus. I've got nothing to do with it, Severus grunted. We'll see, he said, neither agreeing nor disagreeing with Dazai's claim. For his part, Dazai seemed more at ease with that response than anything else. as if he had expected a worse reaction. Minerva couldn't blame Dazai for that. The turn this conversation was taking had her utterly dumbfounded. Severus speaking slowly, carefully, not yelling his fool head off. Had Minerva tripped into an alternate universe where Severus wasn't an angry student eating stick in the mud? It's on your finger. Dazai raised a red-tipped hand. The blood is still fresh. This was interesting. Severus seemed to be expertly assuaging Dazai's fears as well as Minerva's own, and within seconds of his arrival, Severus had managed to placate the rising tensions in the room. It was a good skill to have, but not one anyone would associate with a person like Severus. The words problem child still echoed in Minerva's head, pestering, fond. So you just touched it? Severus huffed. This better not be your own blood. It's not even the cat's. Where do you think all this blood came from, sir? Leave that to the staff to figure out. Not every mystery at Hogwarts is yours to solve, boy. Minerva blinked when she finally placed the discrepancy. Despite Severus's less than harsh demeanor, he had yet to actually untense. His shoulders were still snapped straight. The furrow between his brows had yet to fade. It was obvious now that she was looking. Severus wasn't relaxed at all. He was still just on edge as she was. Only something about Dazai had him hesitant enough to not outright detain the boy, as Minerva was sure he would be doing had this been any other student. Course settled, Minerva strode forward to Severus's side. 2 pairs of eyes snapped to her upon approach. Wash your hand, she told the boy. He blinked up at her, lost for words, when she pulled a clean cloth from her cloak and held it out. After a second, Dazai hesitantly took the handkerchief. He scrubbed the blood from his hand until there wasn't a trace of red left behind. Handing the dirtied cloth back, Dazai said a wary, "Thanks." Then he regloved the exposed hand and hid it from sight once more. Minerva folded it up with a mental note to clean it thoroughly later. Then, to Dazai and Severus, she said, "I would like to have this conversation elsewhere. Away from the students. If Dazai is dangerous, I won't have anyone getting hurt." Severus seemed to hear the unspoken words, if the narrowing of his eyes were any indication, but he didn't comment on it, instead saying, "I would prefer to avoid eavesdroppers." Dazai merely stared up at them, silent. Whatever goodwill let him banter with Severus apparently didn't extend to her. She eyed the boy closely. "We'll need to cast Dazai!" All 3 of them startled badly, whipping to face the sound at once. Minerva raised a hand out to hold the oncoming student back, to protect them from whatever this may be. Luna Lovegood, a Ravenclaw, if Minerva recalled correctly, stumbled to a stop at the top of the stairwell. Luna looked between the professors, then Dazai, then the blood-ridden wall. She took in the scene with wide, impassive eyes and a thoughtful hum. Evidently having decided what was most important, she finally settled an eerily blank-eyed look on the Slytherin boy. "You wandered off," she said, paying the stiff-spined professors no mind. Though the worn bag on her shoulder must have weighed a ton, Luna didn't seem to worry over the weight. Her expression was serene and empty despite everything. "The least you could have done was to help me pick up all the articles I brought you. Instead, I had to pick them all up myself. It took quite a while, you know." "Right. My bad?" Dazai croaked out. Minerva frowned, not entirely untensing, but calmed enough to drop her hands back to her sides. "Miss Lovegood," she said, "I ask that you leave us, for the time being." Luna barely glanced her way. "I've been looking for you. I wouldn't have found you if it weren't for all the screaming. People really don't like you, Dazai. I only had to follow the shouting to figure out where you'd run off to so suddenly. Why did you run off? Was there an evil spirit you sensed?" She blinked, as if abruptly realizing something. Finally, she turned her whole focus onto Minerva and Severus. "Do you read the Quibbler, professors?" Severus answered for her. "Return to wherever you were before this, Miss Lovegood. This is a serious matter. I have no patience for nosy students today." Luna barely seemed to register the command. Minerva glanced to Severus, as if to ask, "What now?" But something stopped her short. Severus had an arm raised out, guarding, in front of Dazai, as if he thought Dazai was the one here who needed protecting. Dazai, with blood on his hands and enough bad press to his name to keep people up at night. He was undoubtedly guilty in some capacity. And yet Severus had decided he wasn't any sort of threat. A knot wrapped itself in Minerva's stomach, and 1,000 questions burned in her mind. Only now wasn't the time to grill Severus over them. Minerva met Severus's eyes, and slowly Severus stepped away from his station. He looked reluctant to do so. I remembered about an assignment I'd forgotten to do, Dazai said suddenly to Luna. It broke Minerva and Severus's silent staring contest, but she didn't miss the moment of clear disbelief shining in Severus's eyes at Dazai's words. Minerva found herself matching that emotion. She couldn't remember even a single assignment Dazai had ever turned in. Unless the boy's work ethic had done a 180 in the last hour, he was obviously lying. I went to go get it, but got lost on the way. Sorry for running off. Minerva scowled, not believing that for even a second. Except that, a breath later, Severus let out a long-suffering sigh. He pinched the bridge of his nose. Resignation deflated his entire being. You can't be serious, Minerva said before she could stop herself. The Slytherin dorms are nowhere near here. They aren't? Dazai squeaked, innocent surprise oozing out of his very being. It was such a contrast to the demon she'd seen minutes earlier that Minerva nearly did a double take. No, not even close, Severus answered, surrender painting his tone. He turned to Luna. Ms. Lovegood, when did you last see Mr. Dazai? All of Minerva's reservations immediately shattered into sheer disbelief. This boy. He couldn't be serious. That was such an absurdly obvious lie. No one could possibly get so lost they wound up on an entirely different floor, then accidentally stumbled into a scene like this. Why was he sticking to the lie? And why did it look like everyone but her believed it? Luna hummed, a small smile playing on her lips. It couldn't have been more than a few minutes ago, sir. Severus nodded. I see. Ms. Lovegood. Luna perked up minutely. Go and fetch Madame Pomfrey and tell her to come here as soon as possible. All right, Luna said smilingly. She didn't hesitate for even a second before whirling around and vanishing down the stairs. She was gone just like that. Minerva had no clue what was going on in that girl's head. Speaking of people who were rapidly becoming incomprehensible to Minerva, she turned a serious look onto Severus. He grunted. We need to be taking Mr. Dazai to see the headmaster. Minerva, if you'll guard the area. Dazai twitched at the announcement, but didn't seem especially surprised that they would be seeing Albus now, whether he was the culprit or not. At least the boy understood the severity of what he'd wandered into. Minerva nodded. She then instructed both Dazai and Severus to step back. Only when they were quite a few feet away did Minerva finally cast the barrier spell. She lifted her wand into the air and said the incantation aloud to herself. In via obis. Magic burst from her raised wand and a shimmering wall of opaque blue rose up on either side of the hallway. It blocked off both sides completely, and only let the slightest hints of light through. No one would be crossing this hall any time soon. Certain that no student would be capable of dismantling her shield, Minerva tucked her wand back in her cloak. Unless she broke the spell apart herself, no one would be able to enter this hallway. It was a much more practical way of guarding than what the staff had been instructed to do last year for the Philosopher's Stone. A guard that was designed to be difficult to pass, but not impossible. That had been a shield meant to be broken, albeit with some trouble. This was decidedly not. She turned back to Severus, content with the power of the shield she'd put in place, and he nodded. He was clearly as eager to get moving as she was. Dazai, however, was focused on something else. He was staring holes into the impassable magic barrier with a look of intense concentration on his face. You won't be able to perform a spell like that any time soon, Severus huffed, evidently reading his snake's expression easily. Enough lollygagging, boy. As soon as it came on, that look of deep focus vanished. A pleasant smile took its place within the instant. The abruptness of the change was jarring, and Minerva found herself tensing up again because of it. Severus, however, seemed to have anticipated that reaction. Let's move, Severus said, voice low and unamused. I'd rather not run into another crowd of students when news hits the rest of the school. Not needing to be told twice, both Minerva and Dazai followed Severus to the stairwell. As they walked to Albus's office, Minerva couldn't keep her gaze from sliding to Dazai every few seconds. The boy had no discernible expression on his face, as though he simply felt nothing at all for the situation at hand. It was unnerving. Even the most innocent of students, perhaps especially those students, would look nervous to be suspected of an attack of this caliber. More so unnerving was how Dazai seemed to be so quickly shifting from uncaring to innocent, to joking at the drop of a hat. It isn't just unnerving, she thought, it's unnatural. Unconsciously, Minerva's hand felt for the wand in her cloak, just in case. Suddenly, Dazai turned to face her. Minerva raised a solitary brow. A normal student, Minerva knew from experience, would avert their eyes, would say, "Sorry, ma'am," would say, "Will I be expelled?" would say, "I'm innocent, I swear." The boy walking beside her was no ordinary student. Some even went so far as to call him a demon. Dazai's lips curved into a half-moon smile. "This is such a hassle. I'd rather just die," he whined. After receiving a rather long-winded lecture from Snape regarding his so-called too casual remarks about death, Dazai now waited poised in Albus Dumbledore's office. Dazai had never been here before. In the past, his only real conversation with the headmaster had taken place in the infirmary, Dazai being too weak at the time to talk anywhere else. But now that he was finally in the man's office, it was painting a good picture of just who Dumbledore was. Now, Dazai sat in the plush chair adjacent to Dumbledore's desk, while Snape, McGonagall, and the headmaster himself held a silent conversation overhead. Despite being the ones to force him here, they seemed to be trying to avoid catching his gaze. Every few seconds he would meet Dumbledore's eyes only for the man to regard him with an odd look. Dazai looked away without a word, and Dumbledore went back to rolling a white pawn in his fingers. He was standing over the chess set in such a way that Dazai couldn't make out who was winning. Never mind them. Dazai was still reeling from the magic-infused headache that was Dumbledore's office. He could use the extra time to make sense of all these sensations. And there was a lot of magic sensation. It had been almost overwhelming at first. The room was wall-to-wall magical items. Each one had Dazai's skin prickling. It took a minute for Dazai to ignore the buzzing sensation of magic enough that it was manageable. Only then could he really take a look around the room. There were the artifacts, of course, some still and others rattling around noisily. Some of them had quite a bit of magic in them, while others seemed barely enchanted at all. The part of Dazai that wanted to study each and every one of those artifacts was tempered by the headache working its way into his skull. The amount of magic here was close to sickening. Dazai's eyes caught on a particularly potent cauldron standing opposite Dumbledore's desk. Magic was practically oozing out of it, though Dazai supposed that was par for the course when it came to potion making. And lastly, the bird. After finally suppressing the overwhelming feeling of magic threatening to knock him over, Dazai's focus latched onto the bird. It had feathers the color of the sun and wings that must have been cramped in that tiny, gilded cage. Dazai almost felt sympathy for it, but more importantly, it wasn't really a bird, or perhaps it was. But Dazai could feel the magic rolling off of it in waves. Some kind of magical bird, then. Dazai eyed it warily. This bird didn't have the same magical signature as the creature he'd chased through the halls earlier, but that didn't mean it wasn't also a threat. Dazai was still trying to figure out what kind of bird it was when the last of their guests finally arrived. Professor Sprout, Flitwick, Lockhart Yu, and a few others Dazai didn't immediately recognize arrived in one group. Dazai noted that Professor Binns wasn't present. Likely, the ghost was busy in his classroom, hovering over textbooks and only somewhat tethered to reality. Snape, McGonagall, and Dumbledore, who had already been present from the start, greeted them with terse silence. Only then did Dumbledore stop fiddling with his chessboard and make his way towards the center of the room. Dazai used the opportunity to peek at the game. Whoever he was playing, Dazai thought, wasn't very good. The ordering of the pieces didn't make any sense. Neither black nor white was winning, and it seemed like maybe Dumbledore had made up his own rules for the game. But he didn't have time to think about that now. With everyone gathered, it was time to focus. Dazai kicked his feet against the base of the chair. He was the only one sitting, even the headmaster choosing to loom over him. The rest of the staff had taken up a semicircle around his seat. It felt a little like being on trial. "What's going on?" Professor Sprout asked, the curiosity in her voice mingling with a kind of cautiousness. "We heard talk on the way over here. Has something happened?" Her eyes flashed to Dazai, then away again. Beside her, the other professors did the same. One of the professors Dazai wasn't familiar with, a severe-looking woman with long and flat auburn hair, glowered. She crossed her arms over her chest, red robes wrinkling. "All we were told was that there was an attack and to come straight here. I take it this is our culprit?" "Not necessarily, Septima," Dumbledore hummed. "Septima... That was the arithmancy professor, right?" Seeing as it was a class only offered to third years and above, Dazai had never met Professor Septima Vector before. Professor Vector didn't look convinced. She continued to glare a judging hole into Dazai's head, where it fell right into place beside his headache. You have not been misled about there being an attack. However, our culprit is still unknown. Nonsense. Everyone startled at the sudden exclamation, save for Dumbledore, Severus, and Dazai. The headmaster's inscrutable eye fell onto Dazai, contemplative. You believe the boy's lies, Albus? Lockhart tutted. He shook his head sadly, as though the others were too pitiful to even look at. I can assure you, this demon is responsible for the attack. Silence answered him. Someone cleared their throat. You don't even know what happened, Snape ground out. Quit your barking and quietly listen for once. Lockhart's perfect smile fell, but only for a second. I don't need to know the specifics, he said, recovering quickly. I have all the proof I need right here. In a wide, sweeping gesture that had Sprout recoiling, Lockhart drew everyone's eyes onto Dazai. The demon of Hogwarts! For him to be here, he must be culpable. Lighting doesn't strike the same place twice, Albus, Lockhart said confidently, despite the wisdom in his words falling flat. First all that Quirrell business, then threatening me at my book signing, and tackling me just earlier today. Now this, whatever this is. Snape bristled and his shoulders rose to his chin. He is a child, not a demon. The other professors nervously shifted in place. Looking at them now, Dazai could easily see who between them believed the Daily Prophet and who was temporarily reserving judgment. Aside from Snape, not a one of the professors was so blatantly in Dazai's corner. And I won't have you throwing around blind claims like that until we've completed an investigation into the matter. I hardly think... Gilderoy has a point, Severus, Dumbledore interrupted. Though his voice was quiet and mellow, it commanded everyone's attention effortlessly. Lockhart preened. Snape's fists shook with a silent rage. Whether Mr. Dazai is innocent or not, this is surely too many coincidences to ignore. Snape and Dumbledore shared a private look. Whatever passed between them, Dazai doubted it was good. A second later, Snape turned to watch the other professors without saying a word. Clearly, they'd come to an understanding, but it wasn't one the potion master was happy about. What happened? One of the professors asked. The thick-rimmed glasses sitting on her nose made her expression appear especially earnest. I've not foreseen this. Everything's been so fuzzy as of late. Do not take the blame onto yourself, Sybil, Dumbledore soothed. It cannot be helped. From here, we can only move forward. That must be the professor for divination, then. Sybil Trelawney. First, let me clear up any questions you all may have. Just a few minutes ago, Minerva came upon a frightening scene. Would you care to explain? McGonagall nodded. I found Mr. Dazai standing beside the body of Mrs. Norris. It appeared someone had written a message on the wall with blood, she summarized neatly. It mentioned the Chamber of Secrets by name. A gasp shot through the crowd. Dazai parsed through each of their expressions, but found no information aside from a mixture of shock and fear. The way McGonagall had phrased that, though, Dazai was sure of it. This Chamber of Secrets, whatever it was no secret to the staff at Hogwarts. The chamber, Sprout said, looking visibly ill. How did a student find out about that? Dumbledore shook his head. That matter is currently unclear as well. Is the chamber... Flitwick abruptly stopped. His eyes flashed to Dazai, then back to Dumbledore. Dumbledore replied with a thin-lipped, quelling smile. Flitwick held his tongue. They don't want me to know about this Chamber of Secrets, Dazai surmised with a pout. Or they're afraid to let the main suspect know more than he already might? Ha! Lockhart butt in. The awful grin on his face didn't ease up. Somehow he looked over the moon about the current situation. Dazai mentally rolled his eyes. I know this boy well, Albus. He must have pressured some of the staff into learning about it. Frightened out of their minds, they spilled the truth, only for Mr. Dazai to turn around and use said truth for evil. Vector spoke over Lockhart, clearly uninterested in what he had to offer, if not a student, then outsider. I am considering that as a possibility, yes. Something briefly flashed across Dumbledore's face, but Dazai couldn't place it. Although, as Minerva has told me, it didn't appear anyone aside from Mr. Dazai was at the forefront of this scene. Vector sniffed. She turned her pointed gaze onto Dazai, who stared back unwavering. I don't think our Mr. Dazai is the guilty party, Sep, the divination teacher said, not unkindly. Vector blinked her attention onto Trelawney, then looked away with a red flush over her cheeks. Not guilty? You sound sure. You have seen something after all, Minerva said. Trelawney startled. Well, no. Just a feeling I have. In response, most of the staff rolled their eyes. But Dumbledore and Vector gave her considering looks. Snape cleared his throat. He shot Dazai the briefest of glances before turning his full focus on Dumbledore. I brought Mr. Dazai here so we might get to the bottom of this issue before releasing him to the wolves. Wolves? Sprout frowned. Snape shot her a look. A second later, realization dawned on her face. Looking around, Dazai saw similar expressions on the others' faces as well. How did you all forget that everyone at this school wants me dead? I appreciate the moment's reprieve, sir. Dazai finally took his moment to interject. Everyone's eyes snapped straight to him. But I think wolves only get hungrier when you deny them their meal. Snape made a face at that, somewhere between startled and disgusted. Taking this as his cue to move forward, Dumbledore walked to his desk. He leaned his weight into it, not seeming to care about the knickknacks he pushed around doing so. Dumbledore leveled Dazai with a patient, but thoughtful stare. Dazai's first thought was to not trust that look. The contemplative intelligence in the headmaster's eyes could only spell trouble. Why don't you tell us your side of the story? He asked. Around the room, the professors perked up in obvious interest. How did you come across the scene? Dazai repeated his story back to Dumbledore and the others, telling them how he got lost and accidentally stumbled across the body of Mrs. Norris. At the disbelieving looks Dazai was getting, Snape resignedly explained that this sort of behavior was normal. Dazai was always getting lost. He then explained about how the blood was still fresh, so the culprit couldn't have been gone long. Dazai carefully excluded details about the mysterious magical creature he'd followed and about his suspicions for Lucius's test. They didn't need to know those things, and it would only draw unwanted attention his way. The professors listened to his every word quietly. Even Lockhart, for once, seemed to be willing to pass on being the center of attention in order to listen, trying to pick out details for his next novel, Dazai presumed. I didn't see anyone else, Dazai finished. Just the cat and the blood. Other than that, the hall was empty. He crossed his legs one over the other, then asked, Do you have any suspects other than me? I'm sure you can find someone else suspicious in this school. Like, Pansy Parkinson is starting a gang. Graffiti is a staple for delinquents like her. A gang? Dazai nodded sagely. It's awful, I know. If he didn't see anything, there's no reason for him to be here, Vector drawled. Leave this to those of us who can actually bring something to the table. Here, her eyes very noticeably pointed to Lockhart. He's neglecting to explain the part where we found him with the blood on his hands, Snape said. Before the other professors could object, Dazai carefully explained. I wanted to see if it was still fresh. It was, by the way. I must have only been a few seconds late. Seconds? Minerva asked, blatantly suspicious. So sure it wasn't minutes? Even an hour? Dazai shrugged in response, not wanting to explain about the presence he'd followed there. In reality, he might have been just a few sprinting steps behind the culprit. If this was a part of Lucius's test, then Dazai needed to keep tight control over the information. The staff took in his lack of answer with matching frowns before turning to one another to talk. Dazai had to strain to make out their conversation. He could be lying, they whispered. He is. Demons can't tell the truth. I've been telling you all from the start. Will you shut up, Gilderoy? We need to consider every angle, and Mr. Dazai has a precedent for trouble of this caliber. But the Chamber of Secrets, he shouldn't even know what that is, as if that stopped him before. Dazai watched the proceedings with a flat expression. He hadn't expected any other reaction, but it was still a bit annoying for them to be talking about him as though he weren't 3 feet away. Curiously, Dumbledore hadn't moved to join the other staff. He remained leaned up against the desk, weathered hands idly fiddling with a gold-glowing artifact. Dazai looked up and met the headmaster's eyes head-on. Dumbledore was staring directly at him. How long? Dazai's frown deepened, but he held Dumbledore's gaze. Can I help you, sir? Dazai asked, keeping his voice low and smooth. Surprise briefly flashed across the headmaster's expression. He hadn't anticipated Dazai breaking the silence between them. It was masked just as fast. Amusement glittered in his eyes instead. I was merely considering it odd that, of all the students, it should be you who I find in my office today. Dazai kept his lips flat, but internally he was glowering. Upon hearing Dumbledore speak, the professors abruptly went silent, Their attention snapped back to the room's other two occupants. "I have the worst luck," Dazai said with a huff. He uncrossed his legs, leaning back into the seat instead. "If you are truly innocent in this attack, then I would have to believe your luck to be the worst I've ever seen," Dumbledore chuckled quietly to himself. Then, he sighed. "Between the public's opinion of you and today's event, I have no choice but to consider you a prime suspect." "Fantastic. Really, just my luck," Dazai droned, giving the headmaster a half-hearted grin. Dumbledore gave him a tight-lipped smile in return. This was exactly the reaction he had wanted to avoid. It was also exactly the reaction Dazai had expected after being carted into the headmaster's office. In the eyes of the entire magical community, Dazai had been guilty before the year had even begun. "The entire campus is afraid of him," Professor Flitwick commented slowly. "Perhaps it is best for now to assume he is guilty. Have him expelled from campus now," Vector agreed with a sharp nod. "Once the Daily Prophet catches wind, Hogwarts will come under fire. Again," she sniffed. "You shouldn't have allowed him back in the first place, Albus. I don't care if he's innocent. His being here is staining Hogwarts' good name and frightening the students." "No one deserves to be blamed without reason," Sprout said. "Despite what the Daily Prophet says about him, Dazai deserves the same. Neither do the other students deserve to live in constant fear," McGonagall countered harshly. Dumbledore hummed. He briefly closed his eyes, hiding his true thoughts from view. When he finally opened them again and began to speak, a knock at the door stopped him at once. All eyes in the room snapped straight to the source of the sound. However, Dumbledore's now open eyes fell instead on Dazai's quiet form. Dazai stared back. "You may enter." A second later, the door flung open and Madame Pomfrey burst into the room. She stumbled to a faltering stop upon seeing everyone's eyes on her. "Oh, I wasn't aware that— Wait, why is Mr. Dazai here?" she asked, blinking several times in bewilderment. Rather than look to Dazai himself for answers, or even to Dumbledore, Pomfrey cast a quick glance in Snape's direction. "Mr. Dazai," McGonagall answered, "is our main suspect." Pomfrey's mouth dropped open. She shook her head and closed it within the second. "That's not possible." Around the room, everyone paused at her words. Trelawney nodded frantically, as if she had somehow anticipated that piece of information. For Dazai's part, he was just as confused as the others looked. Of course he knew that he was innocent, but Dazai was sure that he had no alibi to corroborate that. Luna's testimony really only stood to cast further suspicion on him. So why was the Hogwarts matron so certain of Dazai's innocence? "What makes you say so, Poppy?" Dumbledore asked. Pomfrey sighed, finally closing the door behind her and walking across the room to join the professor's circle. She came to a stop just over Dazai's left shoulder. "First, I should start with this. Mrs. Norris is not dead. She was petrified." A series of gasps rose up throughout the room. Clearly, this was a devastating revelation, but Dazai had no idea why. Dumbledore's expression turned suddenly very grave. Pomfrey continued, "Argus is with her now. As long as I can pull together the proper potions, she should recover just fine, though it will take some time to get everything in order." Dazai had been sure the cat hadn't been breathing, and had been even more sure that she was dead. The effects and applications of magic never ceased to confound him. "What is petrification?" Dazai asked, cutting in. He paused. Now, how to frame this in a way that didn't sound like he was digging for information? Is it a type of spell? He whirled on Snape. "Hey, sir, I want to learn something cool like that in our next lesson. The spell you have me doing now is boring. You especially shouldn't be casting high-level spells. I have you practicing modus subtilis for a reason." Snape suddenly stopped mid-sentence. His eyes widened minutely. Meanwhile, a few of the professors cast him questioning looks. Understanding dawned across Snape's face. "Oh, I see. Dazai Uid." At the exact second Snape had, Dazai understood Pomfrey's claim as well. From the desk, Dumbledore hummed, as he also seemed to realize the discrepancy. "What?" Lockhart asked, looking between everyone. "Why are you all looking like that?" Pomfrey turned to the other gathered professors. "There isn't a non-magical way to petrify someone in such a manner, meaning simply, our culprit must be able to either cast a very powerful spell, or possesses some innate petrifying quality. Like a magical creature, Dazai thought, one that may or may not currently be living in the walls. And he's a demon! I wouldn't put it past him, Lockhart tutted. Snape took a step forward, standing not so subtly between Lockhart and his student. Mr. Dazai isn't capable of performing even low-level spells without falling ill. Seeing as he looks to be in good health right now, I'd say he hasn't spellcast all day, Pomfrey concluded. Her smile was distinctly smug when she turned it on Lockhart. Vector made a thoughtful sound upon hearing Pomfrey's reasoning. Then her eyes fell to Dazai, wearing an expression like she was reconsidering her thoughts on him. You're all just making excuses. Lockhart sighed, evidently distraught. I simply don't believe it. If any of you had even a quarter of the experience I had, you wouldn't be so easily swayed. Flitwick shook his head, stepping forward. No, they're right. I've had the boy in my class for some time now. Although I try not to have him casting where I'm able, when he does it always results in him falling suddenly ill. He paused. Then, no. I'm sure of it, Mr. Dazai couldn't have cast a spell like that. You said the blood was still fresh? Minerva nodded. Meaning, if he were the culprit, Mr. Dazai would likely not have been standing when we found him. I see, Vector said. It seems we've nicely wrapped up this investigation, Trelawney hummed. Her voice held a faraway quality to it. Not dissimilar to Luna's, Dazai thought. Although that still leaves one question. Who's the real culprit? Indeed, we have no other clues. Lockhart brought a finger to his chin, stroking it thoughtfully. Without warning, he suddenly flipped from slightly told off to flashy narcissist in a second flat. A real mystery, although I remain unconvinced of Mr. Dazai's innocence. I would gladly investigate this heinous crime for you all. I'm sure my expertise will be of great assistance. Snape groaned audibly. McGonagall gave Lockhart an unimpressed look. Thank you for your help. It seemed everyone in the room except for Lockhart himself could hear the falseness oozing out of McGonagall's every word. Dazai cut through the tension with a flashy smile. Your willingness to turn on a student at a moment's notice is truly inspiring, sir. In return, Dazai received odd, slightly perturbed glances from all of the professors present. Even Lockhart himself looked momentarily off-put. Dumbledore cleared his throat, pulling everyone's attention back to him. Dazai turned, and once again Dumbledore spoke to the entire room while keeping his eyes on Dazai alone. The focus was blistering. I am content for now in saying Mr. Dazai is innocent, Dumbledore said. Though his tone was pleasant, Dazai heard the distinct hesitance in his words. He hadn't completely written off Dazai's involvement. Dazai narrowed his eyes, and though Dumbledore must have seen the change in expression, he didn't comment on it. We shall end this meeting here. Please, everyone, keep watch for any suspicious activity you may witness. Dumbledore finally leaned off the desk. He smiled agreeably at the present staff. Thank you all for coming. Let's hope our next staff meeting occurs under less dire circumstances. It was silent for a second, before the professors started to slowly shift towards the door. Dazai waited a moment longer before standing himself. He cast the headmaster a long, thoughtful look before turning his back to the man. Severus, Minerva, if you two would stay behind for a moment, Dumbledore said just as Dazai was about to leave. We have further matters to discuss. Dazai looked to Snape, but found the potion master's attention fully on Dumbledore instead. He frowned. Dazai wanted little more than to snoop on whatever conversation was about to happen, but with so many people around, he didn't think he'd manage to sneak back in. Dazai sighed and walked out the door just a step ahead of the arithmancy professor. Vector scoffed when Dazai pushed past her. She shut the door. Dumbledore's private conversation was immediately muted. The professors didn't waste time in mingling, and by the time Dazai had exited the office, it was only Vector, Trelawney, and Dazai who remained. Good luck with those wolves, boy, Vector said suddenly, her voice flat of inflection and expression inscrutable. Dazai jumped. He hadn't expected her to interact with him, but she had clearly been looking directly at him when she spoke. Thanks, Dazai replied. I think... She leveled him with a thoughtful look. Then, Vector shook her head as if dislodging an unpleasant thought. Without another word, she stepped away to join Trelawney at the end of the hall before turning out of sight. Dazai sighed, then left in the opposite direction. It seemed as though the year was just starting to get interesting. Now, if only he could figure out which way the Slytherin common room was from here. 12 Little Red Dazai ducked his head as he walked down the hall, keeping his eyes low to the ground and his senses elsewhere. He probed his focus around the school, but felt no sign of the powerful magical creature he'd felt just earlier that day. Gone. Without a trace. But Dazai still had the nagging feeling that it was close. With the speed it had been able to move at, Dazai didn't doubt that it could strike at any moment. The whole situation had Dazai more on edge than he would have liked. Between this new magical threat and the students who now had more of a reason than ever to hate him, Dazai was facing enemies on all fronts. And unfortunately, in a place like Hogwarts there was really nowhere to hide. There were even fewer chances for Dazai to just wait for things to blow over, seeing as every time he took a moment to breath, it seemed as if the Daily Prophet had one more awful thing to say about him. After today, ugh. Dazai could imagine the inflammatory headlines already. Wind rustled his hair as Dazai walked out into the courtyard. He took a deep, steadying breath and let the mid-autumn air wash over him. It was nice out, sunny and blue-skied, too. Nice out for all the doom-laden thoughts currently riddling holes in his brain. After his meeting with the headmaster, it was only more obvious than before. Everyone here saw him as a threat. Even the professors had been distinctly hesitant to trust him, despite being given Pomfrey's certain testimony. Dazai wondered if they were aware that he saw them as the threat in this situation. Probably not. Dazai sighed as he tore his focus away from the walls. Whatever creature he was looking for must have decided to lay low after its attack. Searching right now would be useless. In the meantime, he needed... Dazai frowned. If he were back in Yokohama right now, with access to all the resources he could ever want, what would he ask Mori for? Dazai meditated on this while he walked, so deep in his thoughts he didn't notice. Something sharp and hard suddenly cut into his cheek. Dazai jumped, hands instinctively raising to his chest protectively. His eyes whipped around the courtyard. 2 students sneered at him from several feet away. Dazai recognized them immediately as Pansy's new friends, the 2 students he'd met earlier that year on the train, Millicent Bulstrode and Tracy Davis. Both were holding stones. Millicent tossed a stone up and down. Meanwhile, Tracy was crouching down in the stone garden, rolling a dozen pebbles between her fingers. Something wet slipped down Dazai's face. When he raised a hand to catch it, his cheek stung. For the second time today, Dazai's glove came away wet with fresh blood. "You threw a stone at me," Dazai commented numbly. He flexed his fingers, watching how the blood shined in the light. "I'm getting sick of people hitting my face. Everyone will see the bruise." Tracy and Millicent didn't pay him any heed. "You killed Mrs. Norris." Tracy spat, vitriolic and unapologetic for it. "Everyone knows what you did, what you are—" Dazai regarded them with a cold eye. He had half a mind to just keep walking and ignore them. Actually, that wasn't a bad idea. These brats had nothing to offer him but stones. Dazai had more important things to do, like writing an update to Mori and hunting down a magical creature. Everyone here hated him, and that was hardly new. There was no need to dwell on it, no need to bite back at kids who barely understood what they were angry about. And with only the 3 of them here, Dazai didn't have to worry about Crab and Coil holding him down like last time. Hey. Certain of his course, Dazai started up his walk again, destination set for the other end of the courtyard. The sooner he was inside and focusing on his work, the better. A few stones didn't bother him. He'd had far worse, and it was hardly going to help his reputation to teach these 2 a lesson. The sound of whipping wind was the only indication Dazai had that another stone had been thrown his way. It smacked into his shoulder with a thump before clattering to the path below. A second later, 2 more stones pelted against Dazai's back. "Where do you think you're going, demon?" Millicent growled, loosing another rock in Dazai's direction. This one smacked into the side of Dazai's head. Despite himself, Dazai actually stumbled against the hit as pain and dizziness suddenly lanced through him. "Got him!" Millicent cawed. The duo cheered. "Tracy, grab some more rocks." The sound of scrabbling stones gave Dazai a precious few seconds to regain his bearings. Head wounds were inconvenient, being so disorientating like that. He shook his head. "Are you stupid?" "Forget the rocks," Tracy shot back. "Now we've got his attention, let's do the real deal." Yeah, right. "Hey, demon, how do you feel about being jinxed?" "Magic." They were going to cast magic at him. Dazai actually stopped at that. Stones were one thing, immature and scratching. Magic was... Dazai felt anticipation swirl noxiously in his stomach. Magic meant no longer human. Quickly, he turned to face the duo. Suddenly remembering his conversation with the professors earlier, Dazai dryly commented to himself, "I told you wolves can't be sated, stupid Snape." He was going to have to deal with these brats after all. I guess, Dazai thought, just waiting for the storm to pass won't be good enough. Then maybe I'll have to get my hands dirty after all. Notably, though Tracy was reaching for her wand, Millicent was still bent over the stones. Halfway through brandishing her wand, Tracy suddenly looked up to see Dazai watching. She squeaked upon realizing he had stopped and was now looking their way. "Millie," she half-whispered, half-shouted, "throw another stone. That freak is looking at us and I'm not ready to cast yet." "Just cast it," Millicent sniped back. However, she still didn't waste a second in arching her arm back in a throw. "I've never done this spell before." Before Millicent could pelt it, Dazai cut in. "Shouldn't you be more scared of me?" Millicent startled badly, fumbling the throw. Instead of cutting into its intended target, the stone ineffectually clattered to the ground at the girl's feet. "By your definition," Dazai continued, unperturbed even as Millicent frantically grabbed for another rock to throw, "I'm some kind of volatile monster. If that were really the case, I wouldn't suggest provoking me. Use the killing curse, if you're going to use a spell at all." We're doing the noble thing," Tracy spat, but the grip on her wand was loose now. "Chasing out the monster before it can hurt anyone else." Millicent whipped another stone at him. Only it missed its mark by a foot. It cracked loudly against a brick pillar. "You're idiots," Dazai quipped, drawing some cheer into his voice. Millicent and Tracy balked at his tone. "But no worse than your boss. Hey, did Pansy tell you to come out here and pelt stones at me? I'm not answering to a demon," Millicent shouted. At the same time, Tracy said, "Not the stones specifically." Millicent shot her a quelling glare. "Of course she did," Dazai grumbled under his breath. Pansy was a thorn in his side, a different kind of problem than the Daily Prophet and Lucius, but a problem nonetheless. The kind of problem that Mori and Father had altogether failed to prepare him for. "Torture and kill your enemies," they said. Well, what about when that thoughtless killing was what got you into this mess in the first place? Of course, the issue with Pansy was more complex than that, but Dazai couldn't solve the girl's inner turmoil. If Draco and Blaze preferred him to her, that was hardly Dazai's fault. He was endlessly charming after all. As with everything else, Dazai was going to have to play a slow con to get Pansy off his back. Threatening her would only provoke more of her anger. But ignoring her outright seemed to bother her just as much. In the meantime, however, Dazai would really like to stop having stones thrown at him. "If you throw another one, I'll do to you what I did to that cat," Dazai said cheerfully. "Which is to say, I won't do anything to you." "But you don't know that." But the words had their intended effect. Both Millicent and Tracy screeched. All the pompous confidence they'd held seconds before crumbled immediately under the pseudo-threat. Without even a second of hesitation, they both dropped all of their stones at once. The rocks fell into an ugly heap. "Tell Pansy." Dazai paused, trying to think of what he wanted to say to the girl. He brought a hand to his chin in thought, but stopped upon remember the blood there. Instead, he wiped the back of his glove against the open cut, smearing it about his face messily. Tell her." He cleared his throat and put a chipper hum in his voice. "I couldn't care less about you, and I'm too busy doing important things to be getting smacked around by your pets all the time. Please keep your self-worth issues to yourself. Much love, Dazai." Millicent and Tracy blinked rapidly as they took in Dazai's request. "Did you get that?" Dazai asked. "I won't repeat it. I really am busy, you know." They continued to stare at him for a long moment. Dazai sighed. There was really no getting through to idiots like this. An epiphany suddenly struck Dazai. He leaned down to snatch one of the thrown rocks from the ground. Then, without warning, he arched his arm back and threw. As was generally the case in the Port Mafia, violence is the easiest solution. The air cracked with the force of his throw. A second later, a loud smack filled the air. "Ow!" Tracy stumbled back quite a few steps, fear and pain shooting through her expression. Dazai's stone had smacked right between the girl's eyes, a raw red cut starting to cry blood down her face. It poured around her nose and clung to her chin. Tracy brought both her hands to the wound, tears in her eyes. "Yeah, you!" Tracy shook. Dazai clapped enthusiastically, but it only had Millicent and Tracy flinching. "I got a bullseye. Does that mean I win a prize?" They stared at him, looking terrified. "No prize, then," Dazai huffed. "Oh well. At least they were paying attention again. Don't forget to pass my message on. The less time I spend thinking about Pansy, the better. You aren't going to, Dazai blinked. "Kill you? Or petrify you? Whatever," Millicent squeaked. "I hadn't been planning on it, but you were really annoying." He trailed off, enjoying the sudden looks of horror staring back at him. After nearly a minute, Dazai broke out into gleeful cackles. He gave a toothy grin. "Just kidding." Somehow, Millicent and Tracy only looked more horrified upon hearing this. These two were no fun at all. Well, they were kind of fun to mess with once you got past the pansy of it all. Thinking their conversation well enough over with, Dazai spun on his heels to leave. It was only when Dazai started to walk away again that those two regained their bearings. Millicent harshly elbowed Tracy in the ribs. She grunted, but a second later was well enough to scamper away, still clutching at her bleeding head. Millicent was only a half step behind her. Dazai watched them go. Alone, the glee in his face melted away. He sighed, tired. If anyone were to look now, they wouldn't recognize the giddy monster from seconds before. Instead, they would see dull eyes and a blank frown. Dazai's expression was not at all dissimilar to the rocks now scattered at his feet. Stony, inanimate. It was easy to enjoy his time at Hogwarts. It was just as easy to hate it. As he'd told McGonagall earlier, this whole year was shaping up to be a real hassle. He'd thought the same thing about last year, too. Dazai hated this odd middle ground between good and bad, the soft morality of it all. Good, because he was doing exactly what Mori wanted for the betterment of the Port Mafia, and bad, the so-called demon student. It was easier, last year, to just be nobody. Instead, he was the ribbed side of a coin caught between heads and tails. Perhaps that was why Mori was content to throw him into the deep end. Or, more likely, Mori was just scheming. Dazai's hand reached for the knife that now rested safely in Blaze's pocket. The blood on Dazai's cheek was already congealed and drying. None of the other wounds had bled, but Dazai was certain each of them would bruise. He was lucky neither Millicent nor Tracy had gone through with casting a jinx at him. Dazai really didn't need two nobodies knowing about No Longer Human. Especially two nobodies who enjoyed Pansy's company. Dazai exited the courtyard with another long sigh. The wind rustling his hair disappeared at his back. A few people were milling about inside. He ignored them. As Dazai entered the hall, he wondered if he could just shelf the Pansy problem for a while. Focus his efforts on Lucius's test, and let Pansy wreak her vengeance unencumbered in the meantime. He could manage a little light bullying just fine as long as Mori's job was being completed. When Dazai looked up from his feet, he saw the hallway empty around him, as if, merely by entering, everyone in the building had hastily vacated. Dazai looked back to the floor. At least alone Dazai would have time to cobble together a plan. He closed his eyes to feel for the beast's magical signature again, but felt only latent magic coursing through the corridor like a bird of prey. "You are certain the boy is innocent?" Severus glowered, disliking Albus's tone immediately. Poppy was correct in saying Mr. Dazai is physically incapable of performing this caliber of spell. He couldn't have petrified Mrs. Norris without rendering himself worthy of a week-long hospital stay. Albus tilted his head, considering this. But he could have written the bloody message. Severus felt his eyes narrow. "I do not believe that to be the case, Albus, but it is possible," he reiterated. Evidently sensing that Severus was about to bark something he couldn't take back, Minerva abruptly cut in. "He did have blood on his hand when I arrived, although it could be explained away by the boy's own testimony of events, if that is to be believed." Minerva spoke slowly, placating. "Though why Mr. Dazai felt the need to investigate the crime scene is beyond me." Severus pinched the bridge of his nose, simultaneously calming his frayed nerves and loosing some exasperation at his problem child. "You were less involved in the investigation into the Philosopher's Stone last year, Minerva. I assure you, this nosiness is completely in character for that boy." Unfortunately, Severus was already mentally preparing to rein Dazai in, should he decide to poke around any more than he already had. If last year was any indication, such preparations were more than necessary. Minerva shot him a questioning look before shaking her head. She turned back to Albus. "Regardless of that, this whole situation has everyone on edge. Students and staff alike. We'll need to make a formal statement before someone leaks the story to the press. The headmaster had, after dispelling the other staff, returned to his seat behind the desk. He rested his chin on two bridged hands, eyes silently regarding the spot Dazai had been sitting at earlier. That would be in our best interest. When Albus didn't expand, Severus snapped an impatient. Without investigating further, we have nothing but theory to give the Daily Prophet. It will have to do, Albus said. Finally, he tore his eyes away from Dazai's chair, looking pensive. I will draft a letter to them shortly. Minerva nodded. In the meantime, we will need to focus our investigation. If the Chamber of Secrets is truly open, then we need to begin our investigation where the previous one left off. Severus, I will leave this to you. Severus blinked, then immediately bristled. If he was looking into the Chamber of Secrets, then that meant, Minerva, you will be investigating Mr. Dazai. You can't be serious? Severus practically shouted before Minerva could even get a single word in. His hands clenched and unclenched at his sides, a burning anger coursing through him. I've been looking into that boy for months now. Albus eyed him. Minerva did the same, though with a bit more surprise in her eyes at the sudden outburst. Exactly why I believe it would be better put in Minerva's hands. You have found practically nothing to show for your efforts. Albus paused, clearly waiting for the potion master to see reason. But when that anger didn't ebb, Albus added a chiding. You've gotten too attached to him, Severus. It is clouding your judgment. Severus growled, but couldn't bring himself to deny the claim. Albus seemed to easily read that reproach. He ignored Severus again in favor of instructing Minerva. I'd like you to keep an eye on Mr. Dazai. If he is the culprit, or is associated with the culprit, he will not lay low for long. Minerva agreed, stoic. Anything in particular I should be looking for? Anything unusual for a 12-year-old? Though he is such a curious child already, Albus answered amusedly. He shook his head. At this point, I suspect finding even the slightest of reasons to expel the boy would satisfy the public. He paused. Of course, I don't aim to expel Mr. Dazai, but report back to me immediately should you witness something to warrant it. I'll keep watch for anything of the sort. She paused. The furrow in Minerva's expression told Severus that she was debating over what to say next, uncertain as to what response would yield the best results. After a short moment, Minerva finally asked, Last year, Mr. Dazai cited the Death Eaters were involved in the theft of the Philosopher's Stone. Did he not? She leveled Albus with a steady, unwavering look. Severus could appreciate Minerva's inflexible tone. What is the likelihood that's the case again now? It looked as though something had suddenly soured in Albus's mouth. Unfortunately, not as low as I would like. All the more reason to watch Mr. Dazai's every move. He's a victim of the Death Eaters, not one of them, Severus snapped. And if you had included about the Death Eaters in your original report last year, we might not be in this situation now. Though Minerva shot him a briefly guilty look, Albus merely nodded. He didn't look abashed even slightly. You know as well as I, Severus, that the boy is adept at keeping secrets. Severus didn't miss how Albus completely steamrolled his second objection. The fact that Dazai had gone nearly an entire year investigating the Philosopher's Stone in secret had not stopped nagging at Severus's brain since he found out. Yes, Dazai was good at keeping secrets, but that didn't mean he was complicit in anything further than being a nosy brat. Severus had seen how the boy could panic, or draw into himself, or sneak around well past curfew. And though that was all concerning in its own right, Severus had stopped finding it outright suspicious quite a long time ago. Worrying was the word Severus would use. Dazai Osamu was worrying because he was a threat to himself, and not to everyone else, and the Daily Prophet would lead you to believe. Minerva, Albus continued, either not noticing or not caring about Severus's mental tangent, I am not asking you to dig too deeply into the boy's past. As much as I find his repeated involvement curious, Severus and Poppy are correct in saying he is too young and too inexperienced to perform the sort of feats he is suspected of. Severus almost barked out a correction that it wasn't Dazai's youth holding him back, rather his health, but he bit his tongue at the last second before speaking. Albus continued, but I see no reason why the boy couldn't still be involved in some manner. Minerva, I'm asking you to keep a close watch on him. Perhaps you could ask one of your prefects to follow him between classes. That's a lot to ask of a student, Minerva calmly objected. These are unusual times, was all Albus said in response. Minerva narrowed her eyes but said nothing. Severus felt himself doing the same. His typical biting remark about how worthless Albus's bigger picture stayed locked behind his lips. Albus sighed. He leaned back into his seat with a grunt. Then, he turned his gaze solely onto Severus. "Have you any more news of Yokohama?" Severus's spine snapped straight and a shudder closed over his expression. His conversation with Poppy the other day echoed through his head, almost like another magical community. "No." Albus raised a brow, the disbelief and surprise clear across his face. "No?" Severus shook his head jerkily. "My inquiries have all been rejected. I'm led to believe Yokohama is simply less welcoming of outsiders than what other cities we've dealt with in the past have been." Albus frowned. The information clearly had caught his interest. "Yokohama?" Minerva asked. "The city Dazai lives in when not at Hogwarts?" Severus paused, deciding on how much he should say. Eventually he decided it was best to let Minerva know of his most pressing suspicions. If she was going to be investigating Dazai from here on out, Severus needed her to proceed with this one thing in mind. "I strongly suspect his home life to be unsuitable, and had reached out to Yokohama inquiring as much." "Unsuitable," Minerva echoed quietly. The second she realized what Severus meant, her expression and tone turned deeply serious. "You don't mean he's being abused?" "I don't know. And Yokohama officials are less than forthcoming," he grumbled. "If you aim to begin your investigation with that city, I simply advise that you don't. You'd learn more about Yokohama taking wild guesses than you would trying to ask a Yokohama citizen about the place they live." Minerva whirled on Albus, only to find his hand raised and silencing. "A problem for another time," he said simply. Minerva balked. She glanced to Severus, clearly looking for support, only to find his expression grim but silent. "Good," he thought. "She understands the severity of my suspicions. Hopefully she won't push my problem child too far." Then he immediately pinched himself for thinking such a sticky sweet thought. "According to Mr. Dazai, Yokohama has a fairly high crime rate." Severus plowed onward hastily. "I double-checked. It mostly looks to be assault and theft, however. Low-level Muggle crimes with no indication of Death Eater activity. And no sign of magic activity either." Which wasn't something Severus had thought to be worried about, until Poppy had dropped her epiphany on him like a 1,000-pound stone. Still, that Dazai had laughed at the suggestion of crime in Yokohama had struck Severus distinctly as being odd. Sure, Yokohama had crime, but it didn't seem to be any more than anywhere else. He'd visited Yokohama, only to find the streets actionless and plain. But Dazai's amusement had been palpable, once again giving Severus the impression that Dazai knew something more than he did. When it came to Dazai Osamu, Severus always felt like he was missing something important. 1,000 jigsaw pieces without a single clue as to how they fit together. Albus hummed, eyes drifting to the side. Severus followed his gaze to the window. Leaves were blowing in a slight wind, still green with the dying ends of spring. Within a few weeks they would wither orange and red, then die altogether. They had barely even made it to autumn, and everything had already gone to shit. "Our opponent is being quite bold," Albus said. Finally, he tore his eyes from the world outside and settled them firmly on Severus. "We need to stay one step ahead of them. The Chamber of Secrets opening is unfortunate, but not entirely unexpected. I'd like to identify the parties in play and move from there. Let's not forget where our priorities lie." Severus glowered. "That's easy enough to say," he thought bitterly. "But how do you win a game without knowing all the players?" It's not that Dazai had no sense of direction. On the contrary, in fact, Dazai had a perfect sense for it. His memory was virtually infallible, on the off chance he actually decided to pay attention enough to learn something in the first place. No. The problem was that Hogwarts just didn't make sense. Dazai was about half convinced that the latent magic around Hogwarts was telling the other students how to navigate the school, because it certainly wasn't telling him anything. Case in point, this hallway definitely led to the dungeons yesterday. Probably, maybe. Dazai gave up on understanding it all a long time ago. At just about the same time he picked up a few loyal bodyguards to act as his guides. Dazai turned another corner. It wasn't the Slytherin dungeons, no surprise there, but maybe it was close. The air had grown a bit colder at least. After nearly 10 minutes of fruitless wandering, Dazai had started going down every staircase he found. The dungeons were down. He'd find it, eventually. In the meantime, all this wandering gave Dazai time to think, and just as Dazai had decided the best course of action was going down, he'd also decided the next best step was finding Draco. If the petrification of Mrs. Norris really was Lucius's test, Draco was Dazai's best lead. Dazai kicked around another corner he vaguely recognized. The cracked, cold stone walls made him think this was probably nearer to the Slytherin common room than not. He quietly felt around for any sign of magic, but felt nothing other than the usual. No sign of the magic lock keeping the Slytherin rooms shut. No sign of that magical creature either. Dazai sighed. Didn't you hear? He perked up. It had been a few minutes since he'd come across any signs of life. This was promising. Dazai might have to threaten them a bit. But it would be well worth it in return for directions. You used to be his friend, right? Someone asked, sounding uncertain. I can't even imagine it. Scary. Someone huffed. Don't call him my friend. I was trying to make him fit into Slytherin, but some people are just unfixable. Dazai paused for only a brief second before suddenly skipping forward at twice speed. He knew that voice. He hurried around the next corner, eyes already wide and searching for the source of conversation. And there! Draco! Dazai called, waving his arms over his head in an enthusiastic greeting. Draco jumped. His wide eyes immediately found Dazai speedily approaching from the other end of the hall. He shot a quick, almost desperate look to both of his companions, 2 second-year Slytherins Dazai recognized from class. Dazai ignored the frantic expression on Draco's face in favor of saddling up beside him. Des? Draco stepped away from him. At his side, the other Slytherins bristled. I don't know why you're looking for me, but I don't associate with your type. Draco spoke slowly and pointedly, as if his eyes weren't already screaming at Dazai to just leave him alone. Dazai nodded, having already expected that sort of reaction. It didn't stop him from looping his and Draco's arms together. Right. But I'm a low-life demon, so I don't really listen to those types of requests. Draco sputtered. You can't just, I can and I am. Wide-eyed, Draco turned back to his other friends, who seemed caught between attacking. Dazai where he stood and cowering in fear. They stared at Draco as if asking what to do. Draco whipped back to Dazai and whispered, Dazai, what are you doing? Dazai shrugged, and the motion pulled Draco forward a step. Deciding that was fine, Dazai gave Draco another shove and started marching him down the hall. I need to borrow some of your Malfoy wisdom, because I'm such a horrible demon who isn't your friend at all. Blah blah oh. They left. Draco blinked rapidly as he tried to make sense of Dazai's nonsense. Then he glanced over his shoulder. Sure enough, Draco's 2 friends had scampered off the second Dazai decided to just steal Draco outright. He caught the tail end of their robes just before they vanished behind a nearby door. Now that it's just us? What are you thinking? Draco shook himself free of Dazai's hold. The mafioso let him, only wearing a small pout at the action. I thought I made it clear that I can't be seen associating with you in public. I wouldn't really call this associating. Dazai stroked his chin thoughtfully. From their perspective, it was really more of a kidnapping. Draco groaned. He pinched the bridge of his nose. I can't believe you. Aren't you supposed to be trying to stay out of trouble? I'd say the ship has sailed on that one, Draco. Judging by the way Draco's entire face seemed to twist, news of Mrs. Norris had already spread to this side of the school too. That wasn't unexpected. But it did mean that Dazai should try to avoid lingering if possible. Where's our office, relative to wherever here is? Draco stared at him for a long moment. Finally, he sighed. Come on, he said, grabbing Dazai's arm and pulling him in the opposite direction the other Slytherins had gone. We aren't even close, idiot. Dazai puffed, but didn't break free from the hold. That's no way to call your boss, Draco. You aren't my boss until we're in the office. Until then, I thought you were kidnapping me. Ah, Dazai clapped. I am, he chuckled, and Draco led him through the long halls of Hogwarts. The body pressed up against Dazai was a steady weight. Unwittingly, Dazai let out a small, relieved sigh even as Draco's fingers gripped him hard enough to bruise. It was odd. The feeling of warmth on his side wasn't unfamiliar. Ever since he started his schooling here, Dazai had been growing more and more used to having a companion with him at all times. Still, Dazai forced himself not to dwell on the realization of how much he liked having Draco with him, of how quickly his mood had changed upon seeing his friend. It wasn't becoming of a mafioso. Mori would say something like that, had said something like that. What happened? Dazai blinked out of his souring thoughts. He turned a questioning eye to Draco. Huh? I assumed everyone had heard about Mrs. Norris by now, he said. Draco's expression briefly darkened, but he shook it off a second later. Not that, he scowled. Draco pointed to his cheek with the hand not currently wrapped around Dazai's elbow. What happened to your face? Oh. Dazai brought his own hand up to the cut. Dried blood chipped off at the touch. It had stopped bleeding some time ago and no longer stung, but he supposed it still made for a frightening picture. Ran into some friends of Pansy. In response, Draco's face did something indescribable. It seemed to twist painfully. Dazai marveled at the expression. Did you know she's making her own little gang? It even has some members outside of Slytherin. Dazai chirped over Draco's internal dilemma. You know she always hated that I associated with Gryffindors. She's turned into a hypocrite while I wasn't watching, Draco. I didn't think she would make friends? Dazai asked, cheeky. Draco shot him a look. Attack you, he snarled. He motioned Dazai towards a staircase. I know she's been meeting with people to talk about the demon student story. I've been there a few times, when she did, but they never mentioned actually doing something about it. Dazai raised a brow. There's no accounting for people like Pansy, he hummed. I knew it was a possibility anyway. Then you should have told me, Draco said. I have sway in Slytherin. I would have made sure no one took things too far. Again, his eyes flashed to Dazai's cheek. He turned away a second later, looking guilty. Dazai made another attempt to wipe the blood away, but without a mirror, Dazai had no idea how successful the effort was. And ruin Lucius's plan to keep the Malfoy name clean? I'd rather not annoy your father too terribly, Draco. Anyway, Pansy's little gang seems to include students from every house. I doubt your Slytherin charm will do anyone much good there. The look Draco gave him didn't seem especially appeased, but Dazai paid it no mind. Instead, his eyes flicked to the other end of the hall. A few people were gathered there, but they hadn't noticed Dazai or Draco yet. The office is just around that corner, right? He asked quietly. As soon as Draco nodded, Dazai slid out of Draco's grasp. In one fluid motion, he flipped their positions. Dazai clutched Draco's arm tightly. He tugged on the limb, forcing Draco to stumble a full step. Dazai didn't let up. He dragged a loudly protesting Draco behind him. Hey, don't pull so! All the shouting captured the other students' attention. They took in the scene with wide, frightened eyes, the demon student harshly pulling along Draco Malfoy. Dazai knew, to their eyes, this scene could only be seen as the demon taking another victim. Draco was clearly being pulled against his will. The Malfoy name wouldn't be stained. No one could possibly misconstrue this as Draco associating with Dazai freely. Like he'd said, kidnapping. The students shakingly scrambled to run away. Dazai only released Draco's wrist once they were well out of the hall. Draco huffed and rubbed his wrist. Was that really necessary? Dazai ignored him. Instead, he ambled over to the wall, where a door was slowly forming on what was once a blank canvas. He swung the door open and let himself inside. A second later, Draco followed before closing it at their backs. Dazai did a cursory glance around the room. Egg was sleeping on the sofa, each snore punctuated by a puff of ashy smoke out her nostrils. With no longer human, Dazai obviously couldn't sit beside the dragon. He walked to the desk instead, aiming to sit in the chair behind it. Before he could, however, something else caught his eye. On the wall opposite the sofa, a mirror was hanging on the wall. Below it was a small table. Dazai beelined to investigate. Draco eyed him but didn't make to follow. He crossed his arms and stood by the desk instead. The mirror was shiny and clearly new. At least Dazai didn't remember it being here last time. But the constant, overwhelming flow of magic in this room kept him from his curiosity. Everything about the office could be written off with magic. Dazai didn't need any explanation further than that. But for a split second, Dazai didn't see an ordinary wall mirror. He saw the mirror of Arised. He saw nothing. No reflection. No dreams or desires. Not even himself. Nothing in this world will ever make me happy. Dazai scrunched up his eyes, tight. When he blinked them open again, the mirror was its usual self once more. A plain sheet of glass. A weary and familiar face staring back at him. He looked away. The table was interesting. Giving it a closer look, Dazai saw a freshly stocked first aid kit atop it. "Wash your face," Draco called from across the room. unknowing of how Dazai's chest had tightened with a coil of unease. "It's unsettling." Dazai met Draco's eyes through the mirror first. Then he glanced to his own face. His eyes were black holes, underlined by heavy dark shadows. The exhaustion in Dazai's face was all too obvious. He hadn't been getting much sleep since school started. Given today's events, Dazai wasn't sure if he was going to sleep at all, but he was there. Dazai had a reflection. That clearly wasn't what Draco was talking about, though. Sure enough, Dazai's half-hearted wiping hadn't cleaned the blood from his face at all. The brown stain of dried blood covered his entire right side of his face. It was smeared grossly under his eye. No wonder people were running away from him. Dazai was starting to look like the demon everyone thought he was. Dazai plucked a wipe from the kit and started rubbing at his face. "How come the magic room gives you everything you ask for, Draco? Just say thank you for the mirror, idiot." Draco paused abruptly. A second later, he grudgingly corrected, "Boss." Dazai gave his cheek a final wash with the wipe. At some point, his rough treatment had reopened the cut. Before it could start bleeding too badly, however, Dazai grabbed a butterfly bandage from the box and hastily covered it over. He checked himself in the mirror one last time before whirling to face Draco. "Better?" "Much," Draco deadpanned. Dazai hopped up onto the desk. After a brief hesitation, Draco sat beside him. It was silent for only a moment. Egg's smoky snores a wheezy sound to fill the gap. "Then, I know your father doesn't fill you in on much," Dazai said abruptly. Draco stiffened, but otherwise didn't look surprised. He had to have known this conversation was coming after Dazai dragged him away from his friends after all. "But I have to ask, does this seem like something Lucius would do? The petrification, the chamber of secrets, the panic." Draco watched the floor. When Dazai tried to meet his eyes under a brush of silver hair, the other snake turned to look at Egg instead. "I don't know." "Maybe," Draco said, clearly hesitant. "He isn't opposed to dangerous things, to get what he wants." Dazai hummed. Giving up on catching Draco's eye, Dazai leaned back into his palms and stared up at the ceiling. "It seemed like too much of a coincidence to me too," Dazai said, carefully not telling Draco that the Port Mafia ascribed to similar tendencies. He kicked his legs out childishly. "Ah, what a bother. I was a little hoping Lucius's test would be something I could do undercover. But 5 seconds in, and I'm already the face of Mrs. Norris's petrification." Draco jolted up. Dazai met his startled gaze with a patient stare. "Petri, she isn't dead?" Dazai blinked. Suddenly he remembered what Millicent and Tracy had said earlier. "You killed Mrs. Norris." So not only did everyone have the wrong culprit in mind, they also had the wrong crime. Though Dazai could hardly blame them, seeing as he'd come to the same conclusion initially as well. "Nope," Dazai said with faux cheer. "I'm sure the real story will catch on eventually, but maybe you could use some of your Slytherin charm to inform the masses. That might keep Gemma off his back for a while at least." Wherever the prefect was, Dazai was sure she was fuming over this turn of events. "But that means you couldn't have been the one to attack Mrs. Norris." "That's exactly what Madame Pomfrey said," Dazai said enthusiastically. "Good luck getting anyone else to see reason, though." Draco's lip curled. "It's fine." This time, it was Dazai who tore his gaze away. He looked to the mirror briefly, then decided he'd rather not see those empty, tired eyes staring back at him, and looked at the wall instead. "I'll just have to shape my movements accordingly. Merlin knows sneaking around is going to be useless this year, even if it got me through the entirety of the last one. Your reputation is 6 feet underground. How are you so casual?" Draco had a wild look in his eyes, and his fingers splayed over his lap. Dazai eyed him for a short moment before smiling. "I guess to a Malfoy, something like that is very important." It was important in the Mafia, too. Although Port Mafia members tended to actually prefer reputations like the one Dazai had accrued here. When people thought you were dangerous, you were, and you wanted to be. It was no lie that fear was a fantastic motivator, as Mori had told him all those weeks ago. Although Dazai, either stuck in his room or shipped away on this secret job, had considered having no reputation to perhaps be superior. Too late now, he supposed. "The Malfoy name holds weight," Draco emphasized pointedly. Dazai nodded. Then, turning suddenly serious, he said, "Hence why I need to figure out Lucius's tests sooner than later. Your father is trying to decide which horse to back, the Death Eaters or the Port Mafia. If he makes the wrong choice, your Malfoy name is going to be right beside my reputation. 6 feet under," Draco's lip pressed into a thin white line. I have a few leads, Dazai said, when it became obvious Draco wasn't going to say anything. Things I need to research. You're welcome to tag along if you want. Draco glanced to him. There was something distinctly tense in his jaw, and he looked uncomfortable with this turn of the conversation. Isn't that more Hermione's job? Dazai chuckled. The two of you are getting along then. No, he protested, but everyone knows she's the bookworm. For a lousy Gryffindor, she's actually fairly smart. I suppose. Dazai made a point to roll his eyes, earning a searing glare in return. He waved Draco off. Draco is my partner in crime for this one, he said simply. Besides, Hermione and the others are busy with the test answer selling schemes, though Dazai supposed a few questions here and there couldn't hurt. Short of explaining the Port Mafia and Lucius's test, something Dazai in no way wanted to do, that was probably the most use Dazai would get out of Hermione. He shook away the idea. Forget about that, Draco. The library research is secondary this time. Draco blinked, clearly surprised. What? How? First things first, what do we know about today's incident? Dazai spoke slowly, making sure to get his thoughts in proper order before continuing. Draco watched him expectantly. 1. Mrs. Norris was petrified, probably by the magical creature living in the walls. The what? 2. A message was left behind at the scene, mentioning something called the Chamber of Secrets. The professors know what that means, but don't want to share. Dazai counted off on his fingers. And 3. When I arrived at the scene, no one else was there, despite the message having only been painted moments before. The first people to arrive after were students. It was silent for a second before Draco seemed to realize Dazai was finished. He cleared his throat. We need to research what the creature in the chamber are, Draco. Surmised. And... Dazai raised a brow, waiting. It was only a second later Dazai saw the shock of realization alight Draco's features. You think the culprit was among the first students to arrive? Fred and George have shown me every hidden passage in Hogwarts, and there isn't one anywhere near that hallway, Dazai explained. For the culprit to have just narrowly missed me, they couldn't have made it far, meaning they probably ran straight into the crowd. If they wanted to keep their cover, they would have been forced to join the crowd, rather than try to sneak past it. That makes this easier. Draco's frown twitched. Who was there? Dazai beamed so brightly that Draco winced. That's where you come in, loyal subordinate? Draco's lip curled in a sneer, but it fell apart less than a second later. Something heavy flashed in his eyes, and he dipped his head again. Dazai faltered. Guilt. Draco looked guilty. But Dazai was certain Draco wasn't the culprit, which meant this guilt ran deeper. It was the same expression Draco had worn during their last conversation in this room, talking about what kind of person Lucius really was. Dazai needed to plow onward, regardless. He didn't really have time to deep dive into Draco's current internal crisis. He also didn't want to. Lucius isn't on campus, Dazai said carefully. He waited for Draco to lift his head again before continuing, which means he set today's incident into action sometime before school started. Sometime between the end of last year and the start of this one, Lucius worked a student under his thumb. Something in Draco's expression twisted at Dazai's harsh turn of phrase. Dazai didn't allow himself to feel guilty for it. He'd rather have Draco at his side than at Lucius. Draco. He met the other boy's eyes. In that span of time, who has your father been in contact with? Draco stared, his usually self-assured expression now mottled with uncertainty. Dazai knew such an expression would have shocked him more, had he not seen Lucius and his son interact in person, had he not seen it on himself on occasion. I don't know, Draco said. I know Lucius tends to not include you on these things. Dazai ignored the way Draco's brows pulled upon hearing that. But that doesn't mean you don't want to be included, even if he doesn't ask. You've been paying attention, haven't you? I don't know, Draco emphasized. He doesn't tell me anything. Well, I'm telling you. Lucius orchestrated today's attack then so that I can solve it now. Dazai rapped a knuckle against the desk. He never said asking you for help was off limits. Draco slumped, none of his regal upbringing showing in his posture now. A crackle of stained glass lit the office up blue and red. Dazai leaned into the warmth. Egg woke slowly on the sofa. She looked around, eyes briefly landing on Draco and Dazai before sluggishly falling away. She hopped off the sofa with a flap of her wings. Her claws clacked against the floor as she walked to a sunny red glass-stained patch on the floor, where she curled back up to sleep under the warmth. My father is busy. He has a lot of meetings. Dazai blinked away from Egg to find Draco solemnly tracking the dragon's movements as well. Draco sighed. At the same time, Egg puffed out an unusually large ball of ashy smoke. A lot of important people want to meet with my family to ask for favors or to get a grasp on how the political tides are turning, but they come to him. The only time we left the house all summer was once for a charity gala, then again to meet you at Diagon Alley. Dazai hummed. Do any of these important people currently have kids at Hogwarts? Of course they do, Draco grumbled. Most of them Slytherin. Silently, Dazai recalled today's incident to his mind's eye. The students in the crowd, some of them had been Slytherin. He turned to look Draco in the eye, but Draco was already listing names off without the need for extra prompting. Theodore Knott, Millicent Bulstrode, Tracy Davis, Crabbe, Coil. He paused. Pansy. Dazai sat up. Pansy was there, actually? Millicent and Tracy too? Draco shot him a glance. Pansy and I hung out while her mother schmoozed with my father. He made a face. I didn't realize you were friends with those two, though. We've only met. They're in Pansy's. Dazai frowned. Anti-Dazai gang. Dazai huffed, considering that. Sure enough, he'd seen Pansy's face among the crowd earlier, and though Dazai didn't think he'd ever held a conversation with Knott, he could recognize the boy's face. Yes, he'd been among the crowd. At the very least, Dazai was certain that Millicent and Tracy had only found out about Mrs. Norris after the fact. He hadn't seen them at the scene, and based on what they'd said, they had heard about it sometime later. As for Crabbe and Coil, though Dazai had seen at least half of their duo among the crowd, he severely doubted they had the brains to pull something like this off. That meant 2 names for 2 suspects, although, Dazai thought with a frown, if Lucius made his connection at Flourish and Blots, that adds dozens of names to the list. Okay, so 2 names for possibly more than 2 suspects. Professor Lockhart was at the gala as well, Draco said suddenly. Dazai jolted out of his thoughts. What? Not for long. My father really can't stand him, and I think Professor Lockhart got the feeling he wasn't wanted after the first 20 minutes, Draco explained. Father may not like him, but as a celebrity, an invitation was extended regardless. Well then. 3 names and probably more than 3 suspects. His list was getting a little unwieldy. Lockhart may not have been among the crowd, but as a professor he wasn't as limited in his movements. Moreover, Dazai remembered seeing him nearby just moments before finding Mrs. Norris himself. More than that, Dazai really didn't like the man. Finding him guilty would make Dazai's entire year. Ah. Do you think a defense professor could be evil 2 years in a row? Dazai joked. Draco's slumped figure froze for a second. Then, quietly, a small laugh broke from his lungs. Don't jinx it, boss. I'm not. It's only that Lockhart is already so awful. It's not much of a stretch. As long as you don't try and convince me about some phony wizard mafia theory again. Draco started to laugh, but then abruptly realized what he'd said and clamped his mouth firmly shut. Dazai did laugh. Even I couldn't make that leap, Draco. Lockhart is spineless. He has all the backbone of a wet noodle, and none of the necessary menacing aura. Now, Draco did snort. And Quirrell did? It was a subtle thing. Once you got past all the stuttering and almost crying, Quirrell was a scary guy. Still, suddenly the door flew open. It banged against the wall with the force, rattling the stone. Draco flinched at the sound. Beside him, Dazai jumped off the desk and shifted his feet into a defensive stance. Even Egg, in her patch of sunlight, bolted awake. She flew into the rafters above in a trail of startled smoke. Dazai! Fred and George shouted, eyes looking around wildly. When they found Dazai, the twins let out a leaden sigh of relief. Oh, thank Merlin. When we heard what happened and couldn't find you on the map, Dazai melted the tension from his shoulders forcibly and drew an accommodating smile onto his face. Draco gave him an odd look, but Dazai brushed it off. It's... Hermione cut herself off upon entering the room. I told you he would be in here. You worry too much about him, Ron said, arriving in step with Hermione. Despite his words, Dazai saw clear relief in how Ron's shoulders slumped upon seeing him. Fred and George ignored the barb, already hurrying across the office to look Dazai over. While those two fussed over him, Dazai waved hello to Blaze, who was shutting the door quietly behind everyone. Blaze smiled while looking him up and down searchingly. Hey, what's this? Fred said suddenly. George's finger hovered just shy of poking into his cheek. Dazai smacked the hand away. Though the twins let it happen, their asking eyes didn't lose any of their intensity. Some Slytherins making trouble, Draco said before Dazai could get a word in. Everyone turned to him. I won't be letting them get away with it. Fred and George oohed, amusement lighting their expressions. Going to sick big bad Mr. Malfoy on them? Draco froze, something dark and uncertain warred in his expression. No, Given their previous conversation, Dazai severely doubted Draco wanted to reach out to his father for something trivial like this. Dazai took pity on him. Everyone in Slytherin loves Draco. I'm sure if he asked enough, they'd learn to stay in their place. Fred and George made an appreciative sound at that, but still hadn't finished their fussing. Dazai made another attempt at brushing them off. So you all came running to see me, is that it? He asked. Ron huffed, a denial ready on his lips. But Blaze was already nodding in agreement before the Gryffindor could open his mouth. We heard what happened. Hermione came forward, grasping both of Dazai's hands in her own. Dazai jumped at the unexpected touch, but didn't pull back. Still, Hermione seemed to notice his discomfort. She let go of him a second later. About Mrs. Norris and the professors taking you somewhere. Is it all true? Knowing that it would be a long story, Dazai walked to the sofa and promptly blanketed himself across it. Of course, he would have to leave out several key details. Lucius, Port Mafia, the fact that he would in fact be investigating the petrification, but he could give them the broad strokes. This was his gang after all, and he thought they deserved at least a sliver of the truth. But only bosses and their most trusted got to glimpse at the full picture. Hence why Dazai was at Hogwarts buried in half-truths while Mori stayed in his office back home, smiling over a joke untold.
Thank you and subscribe for more Bungo Stray Dogs fanfictions. Let me know what was your favorite scene.